I am Justin Hsu. I'm the Conservation Program Manager for the National Great Rivers Research and Education Center. And tonight, we're going to talk to you about our Habitat Strike Team. So I really enjoy these neighbor night events because we get to showcase some of the things we have going on at NGRREC. So next slide, Jen. All right, so before I get into what our Habitat Strike Team does, I'm going to kind of give you an overview of our conservation programs in general. So I don't know if anyone tuned in last fall, but we talked about our Land Conservation Specialist program. So that's one of our main programs within our conservation program. And those folks are remotely stationed throughout Illinois, and they're working out of USDA, United States Department of Agriculture service centers, and they're actually helping landowners and also our main partner, the NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and actually helping them implement different conservation practices within the landscape of Illinois, particularly working with agricultural producers. So if you're interested in learning more about that program, you can go to our YouTube link there. But tonight we're going to talk to you about our Habitat Strike Team. So with the conservation specialists, they're actually kind of doing more of the planning, going out to do field assessments and checks like that. Whereas our strike team is going out and actually putting these conservation practices on the landscape. That could be establishing a prairie, that could be doing timber stand improvement in our woodlands, that could also be conducting a prescribed fire. So they're the boots on the ground support doing the habitat management work. I'm not going to talk to you specifically about what they do. We have a variety of speakers tonight that will going to showcase what they do for you. Next slide. So I'm going to get it started tonight and talk to you about the history of our strike team and also give you an overview of the partnerships we have currently going on. Next, I'm going to hand it over to Ross Albert, who's here with us tonight. He's with the Illinois Recreational Access Program. Ross is the he's the IRAP coordinator for the southern half of the state, and he's also a previous land conservation specialist. Next, Cody Berry is going to talk to you about the different management practices the strike team does. He is the former Habitat Strike Team coordinator. And then last, we'll have Phil Rates, who's actually a student from the Lewis and Clark Restoration Ecology Program. And he's going to share with you some of his experiences he's had with the Restoration Ecology Program, but also how he's been able to engage with our Habitat Strike Team. And then after that, I'll have some concluding remarks, and hopefully we'll definitely have some time for some questions. Next slide. So our strike team was originally started in 2016. So the top left, it was kind of our first strike team, and we're kind of progressing through time in a clockwise direction. I believe Eric Wright is listening in tonight, and he's actually pictured there in the front of that top left picture. So the main thing I want to point out is that our strike team, throughout time, it has actually grown. So we still just have 2 full-time staff. And then our original strike team, we had additional part-time staff. Now we have those same kind of core members of our strike team, but we have grown in numbers in terms of assistance, particularly from our Restoration Ecology Program at Lewis and Clark. So now we're offering paid student internships for students within that program. And you'll learn more about that program tonight when Phil talks. Next slide. So here's our most recent picture of our strike team that I took back in late summer. And we have Dylan going from left to right. We have Dylan Smith. He's a restoration ecology student at Lewis and Clark as a paid intern. Phil Race is up there at the top. He's currently our junior assistant. And then Cody Berry is in the UTV. He is our former Habitat Strike Team coordinator. He's since moved on to become a land conservation specialist. And then we have Lindsay Griggs, our senior assistant. And then to the far right, we have Michael Hamilton. He was our junior assistant. He's since moved on to a different position. And I do want to emphasize that people that have been a part of our strike team have moved on to some really great positions. For instance, as I mentioned, Eric Wright, he's the stewardship director at the Nature Institute in Godfrey. And we also have another former strike team member who works for the Army Corps of Engineers currently. Next slide. So aside from the habitat management, which Cody Berry will talk to you about, I do want to emphasize some of the other things the strike team does that are really important, especially to me. Of course, we're providing education support. So as I've already mentioned, we're providing student training to students within the restoration ecology program and providing those, paid student internships. Also, I've been able to mentor over 5 different undergraduate students doing research relating within our summer research internship program. And so luckily, working with our partners who are doing a variety of habitat management, including our habitat strike team, we have projects looking at wildlife response to these different habitat management practices, and that's particularly of interest to me because that's my background is in wildlife ecology. Then finally, of course, that kind of brings us here tonight. We actually, help the education team quite a bit. So it's nice we get to share what our strike team does with you tonight in our neighbor nights, but also, pre-pandemic, if there's a water festival, we're there helping with different stations to teach kids about habitat management. Cody's up there pictured in the left, talking to a member of the public about some of the work he's doing. If we could do this, in person, we would be able to show you some of the tools in person, but we can't do that now, but we still get to share, what we do with you tonight. So next slide. And before I pass it on over to Ross Albert, I do want to highlight some of our partners, which helped get our strike team started. So in 2016, our strike team was originally started with a partnership with the IDNR, the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, and specifically the IRAP program. So through that agreement, we were able to establish our staff for the strike team and also purchase a variety of equipment and gear to help them get started. When that agreement was ending, we needed to come up with a different funding source. So luckily we were able to find this other funding source called the Habitat Stamp Fund. A portion of the hunting licenses that are sold in Illinois go towards this fund, which support a variety of habitat related projects across the state of Illinois. They're particularly targeting more of the public lands. And this kind of was a nice grant to go after because it kind of gave us a great excuse to reach out to some of the partners that we are been kind of working with already. So for instance, now we're working with the IDNR Heritage Division, also working on properties in the nature preserves that are owned by the Nature Preserves Commission, also the Great Rivers Land Trust, and also the Nature Institute. So these are kind of the partnerships that we have going on currently. And with that, I do want to turn it over to Ross, and he's going to talk to you about where we spend the most of our time is working with the IRAP program. So I'll hand it over to Ross Albert.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to start out kind of with what is IRAP and why was this program created? So IRAP is the Illinois Recreational Access Program. And the reason this program was created is 96% of the land in Illinois is privately owned. So there's pretty limited access for people to go out to get sites to go hunting and fishing. And really in the past, you used to be able to just go up and knock on people's doors and get access to hunting ground. And that's not as easy to do anymore. So our goal is to try to provide more access to private land to hunt, or really public land. And then also fewer people are hunting than what there used to be, especially young people. We see a lack of recruitment of youth and into hunting, and hunting contributes to a lot of our conservation dollars that we're able to use. Next slide. So that's where I get into this, to how IRAP is funded. So IRAP was started in 2011. So our first round, we went for the Farm Bill VPA HIP grant, which is the Voluntary Public Access Habitat Incentive Program grant. And we use that as a majority of our funding, but also, as Justin had mentioned, we also use habitat stamp funds for management on some of these IRAP sites. So with your hunting license, you're required to get a habitat stamp, and that habitat stamp is like a $5 fee that goes directly into this fund. And just as an overview of the Farm Bill, for people that may not know what it is, the Farm Bill is essentially legislation that kind of connects our food to the farmers and ranchers that produce it, as well as connecting it to the resources that grow at our soil, water, and air. Within the Farm Bill, you'll see conservation dollars such as the VPA HIP grant, Conservation Reserve Program, which is like pollinator habitat that goes on to some of these what used to be agricultural ground. There's some forestry programs through NRCS that this money goes towards, but also you see money going towards things such as like SNAP benefits, federal loans to farmers to sustain their operations, organic farming, renewable energy, and several other things. Next slide. So since its inception, IRAP has enrolled over 22,000 acres in probably a little over 48 counties now. If you see the map on the right side of the screen, you can see the blue dots. That's kind of the distribution of our IRAP properties. So I'm going to start off with the landowner incentives of the program. So starting off, when we sign up a landowner, we get them a free habitat management plan, which can be used in other programs as well, such as tax reduction programs like the Forest Development Act or the state's Conservation Stewardship Program. And they can also be used in NRCS programs as well, such as EQIP and CSP. So landowners can kind of pick and choose what activities they allow to occur on their properties. And based on those activities, we give them a lease payment for the activities they allow. We also give a bonus to landowners for conducting management on their property. We give them a bonus if they've conducted management on at least half of their acreage as an incentive to get them to do so. And we also give them a bonus if they're a property that's in our target area. So our target areas are more so the metro areas such as St. Louis, which is like Jersey, Madison, St. Clair, and Monroe County, and then north of I-80 up towards Chicago. We also target sites now that are enrolled in WRP and WRE, which is the Wetland Reserve Program or Wetland Reserve Easement Program. NRCS is looking to put more management on sites like these. So our goal is to enroll these sites into our program so we can put some management on them. I'll let Cody discuss here later on what kind of management we do on properties, but we cost share up to 75% of the cost for management projects on these properties. I said earlier, it used to be easy for you to just go up and knock on a door and get permission. And one of the reasons that's not the case anymore is people are scared of liability. So IRAP covers all liability for our hunters that come through our program. We carry a $2 million insurance policy for each landowner that enrolls in the program. And then when hunters sign up to utilize our program, we have them sign a liability waiver. And then each time they apply to hunt a site, we also have them sign a liability waiver. Another incentive for landowners is we purple paint the property boundaries. So purple painting essentially is a legal way of saying no trespassing in the state of Illinois. You can see the picture kind of in the middle of the screen. We just paint a purple line that is at least 8 inches long and is at least, the bottom of the line is at least 3 to 5 feet off the ground and spaced within 100 feet of each other. And this is a legal, no trespass marking, but it also helps our hunters to understand where they're at on the property boundary. Next slide. So now I'll go to the hunting aspect of IRAP. So our goal, as I mentioned earlier, is to recruit more youth. So when assigning sites, our priority is youth, and then we search for first-time hunters, and then veterans and people with disabilities are next in line, and then it's kind of an open lottery for everyone else who wants access. In terms of access, we have deer hunting access, turkey hunting access, small game and upland game hunting, so that's squirrels, rabbits, quail, and pheasant, waterfowl hunting, and fishing access. I'll kind of break down those dates here. So archery, deer access, we have archery access, which could be either sex or doe only sites, depending on what the landowner chose. Those dates are, a hunter gets assigned to one of these dates, and you can apply to choose one of these dates. October 1st through the 15th, October 16th through the 31st, and then the last 2 weeks of December. And then on some properties, instead of that first 2 weeks of archery season, landowners can choose to do the youth shotgun season, which is that Columbus Day weekend or the second weekend in October. Next slide. Then we have turkey access. You'd have to look in the hunting regulations for those dates because it's separated into 2 zones. But we sign up landowners for the youth turkey season and then the 3rd and 4th season as well. Next slide. So we also have waterfowl access, which is, we sign them up November 1st through December 31st to try to avoid, some properties sign up for multiple activities. So we start November 1st to avoid the archery deer season. And then on most sites, we provide blinds, we build blinds and we brush them in for people to utilize. Next slide. And then we also have pond and river fishing access, which is April 1st through September 30th. You can apply for that online. It's like I believe Friday through Monday, and you can select like up to 3 days at a time to fish. But if you sign up ponds with us, we can assist with having your pond shocked and stocked. And those pictures on the bottom are actual pictures of us having a pond shocked and stocked so we can try to manage the species composition properly. Next slide. And I'll hand it over to Cody.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Like Justin said, I'm going to speak a little bit about our Habitat Strike Team tonight. And so I started this out, just kind of preface it. What is a Habitat Strike Team? Yet I guarantee everybody, has probably discussed with people where you work. What do you do? And when I get the question, what do you do? Well, I was working with the strike team and I told people Habitat Strike Team. It's not a very common, job title. So Habitat Strike Team basically is just a group of trained professionals who, have experience with habitat restoration. The interesting thing with our NGRREC strike team, which I would hope that it would hold true with all strike teams, but especially since NGRREC is a research and education center, we have that level of science going on down there. I feel like our strike team really utilizes practices that have scientific backing to them. So they're going to, we try as well as we can to utilize practices that are going to benefit the ecosystem as a whole and not just aim it towards one species or another. And so we've got some pictures, our Habitat Stamp Fund project sign, which we put up on a site, and then a picture of almost our most current strike team. We've got a few members that aren't there, but if we could move on, go to the next slide, and So reasons for restoration efforts, why do we want to restore these habitats? So I, just go through some of these pictures. If we go to the top left-hand corner, we've got a picture here that is a native plant. It's called Dutchman's Breeches. It's actually an interesting plant. It's what they call a spring ephemeral. So it lives for a very short time. They actually come out early in the spring before anything else leaves out. And they complete their life cycle in a fairly short time of just a few weeks. So it's a really interesting plant. There are, probably a few dozen species of what these ephemeral plants. So if you get out in the spring and you want to take a hike, that's an interesting one to look for. In the center there, we've got a picture of a timber rattlesnake. So endangered and threatened species, that's a big one. And especially locally in our area near Alton, Illinois, we've got the Great River Road. I believe it's Highway 100. We've got an interesting community there. It's a bluff community that's right along the Mississippi River. And this is one of the habitats for that timber rattlesnake. And so we manage there, and that is a very interesting species that we have to manage for and think about when we put these practices into play. Got a cottontail rabbit. It's a cool picture. They're neat animals. Tying it back with the IRAP side with hunting, a lot of people, common complaint that I hear is there isn't a whole lot of small game anymore. One of the biggest reasons for that, the biggest reason for that, is habitat loss. I know a lot of older folks that like to, talk about, oh, we used to hunt rabbits all the time. We used to hunt rabbits, quail, pheasants, things like that. And we just don't have them anymore. They're still there. They just don't have the habitat that they once did. We spray all of our fence rows now. Our farming techniques are different. So they just don't have a place to live. And that's, we manage the habitat for that reason. Birding, if anybody likes to bird watch, that bird nest, I found that in a CRP planting that was on an IRAP site we were working on. The other two pictures, I'm ready for spring after this cold week. That one of them is my little brother. Last year we took a fishing trip, and that's a crappie that he was quite proud of, as you can see. So that, and then the morel mushrooms. Almost everybody most likely knows what those are. And I'm sure they've got you all ready for spring too. So all of these things, we manage for all of these. And not only do we manage for, recreation, but we also just manage for overall ecological health and, not only the health of the habitat, our own health, our own sanity, just green places that we can go and enjoy. So we go to the next slide. Okay, so when we go to restore a site, the first step every time is going to be conservation planning. And we're not a huge part of that. I would say that Ross gets the majority of that, discussing with the landowners and everything, but we've definitely had landowner interactions and, helping to plan out what somebody wants to do with their site. So these pictures, basically, we've got our cedar here that it's actually a cedar that we borrowed from Pheasants Forever, where they've got another strike team in the northern part of the state, and they loaned this to us. And so we were able to seed some prairie, and basically when we seed these prairies, a lot of these are CRP plantings. And so I've got here, we work with the landowner to clarify the objectives for the site. We create a clear plan for the work that's to be conducted. So, depending on what the landowner wants for that site, whether they want to hunt it, whether they want to conserve soil, we work with them to kind of tailor a plan for each site. So if we could go to the next slide. Okay. And so after we've got a plan, while we're making the plan, we put in what we call conservation practices. or management practices in that plan. So typically a plan is, we say 5 to 10 years is a good number just for, a start on a property. And there are 3 major practices that we utilize. One of them, non-native invasive species control. This is typically the first, just because the amount of damage that a invasive species can create on a site. These invasive species come in, they compete with our native plants. Animals don't use them hardly ever, if they do at all, for forage, bedding, anything like that. And so really, number one is to get rid of these invasive species. We use a few means for that. Chemical, mechanical, and biological controls are the big 3. We don't typically use biological controls. I guess if we were to try and say plant a prairie and just try to outcompete the invasive, that would be kind of a biological control. But the big 2 would be chemical and mechanical. Now mechanical, we use from time to time. We use it in areas that are a little more sensitive and we don't want to use chemical in them, obviously. Mechanical would be great if you were trying to work in your yard, or if you were trying to work in, your flower bed or something, and you had an invasive coming up, then maybe pulling or cutting would be a viable option. For our purposes, a lot of times we're dealing with acres and acres. We have contracts that are 70 or 100 plus sometimes acres that we're working on out there. So chemical, it's kind of a necessary thing. It's just the most efficient method of control. And I've got down here, like I just said, method of control, it depends on the severity. So that's how we kind of decide that. This picture here, this is actually me. I don't know who found this, but they sent it over. And backpack spraying. So we use these backpack sprayers, hike around, and we're able to kind of selectively treat these invasive species, to kind of push for the natives to take hold. So if we go on to the next slide, and I think it should be, so some common invasive species in our area. I won't go really deep in, into these, but just to be familiar, multiflora rose, bush honeysuckle. Almost everybody probably knows that one. Bush honeysuckle is everywhere and it just wreaks havoc on our native systems. Autumn olive is another widespread one, Japanese honeysuckle. And these aren't by any means an all-inclusive list. I mean, there are dozens, and we actually have a list in the state with invasive species that makes them illegal to sell, illegal to transport. And so just getting to know those plants and trying to, even, if you want to help, just remove them from your yard, remove them from your local areas. So if we go on to the next slide. So timber stand improvement is our next, typically our next step. Okay, if we're dealing with a woodland environment, once we've cleared out the invasives, you can see in this picture on the right of gentleman cutting with a chainsaw. I'm unsure if this is Brian Stoff or maybe Eric Wright. Can't tell, but you kind of see on the forest floor there's not a whole lot of undergrowth and not a whole lot of shrubs and stuff. And if this site did have any kind of invasive species, I would say they probably treated them and they're probably gone, which we typically try to get rid of, before we do TSI. So the whole point, we come in when we do timber stand improvement. I've got here selective removal of certain species of trees, and we're just trying to recruit promote the recruitment of other species. And so in our area, to kind of explain this better, in our area historically, our forests were dominantly oak hickory forests. And so oak trees and hickory trees were the main brunt of our species diversity. And so a lot of different things have happened that have changed that. Lack of fire on the landscape is a big one. Over harvest and logging is kind of a big one. We didn't used to practice sustainable logging. And so like in this picture, you can see, he's cutting this tree down. And I believe that is maple, looks like a hard maple. And so, the whole point, a maple is what they call a mesic tree species. It's a softer wood tree. It grows faster. In succession, they're going to be the first tree that actually grows. We're trying to basically speed up that process and kind of, assist with the recruitment of those oaks and hickories. Another thing that I will point out is the center picture. That is just cut stumps. So some trees we just cut, we drop the tree. He's treating the stump there. And basically we just want to treat that cambium layer, so that tree doesn't grow back. Now that is going to do two things. It is going to open up sunlight, and obviously that's going to help with the recruitment of the more desirable trees, like I mentioned. It's also going to assist with your ground layer. Your vegetation on the forest floor is very important in terms of forage, in terms of bedding, brood rearing for many species of animals. So just having that cover and having that food available is a big thing. The picture down in the far left-hand corner here, that is what we call a girdle. That's actually a double girdle, and you can see where the bark has fallen off right there. So basically all we do there is we just cut down through the cambium layer and that bark and separate so that the nutrients can't flow up into the canopy of that tree anymore. It kills the tree, and so we leave those. When we girdle, we actually just leave those trees. We leave them standing and they become habitat trees. If you think about woodpeckers, we've got multiple species of bats. Some of these are endangered species, or if they aren't listed, they were in the last 10 years or so. But we leave those as dead standing. The bugs infest them, and then, it gives food, habitat. The squirrels make nests in them, and so they serve as habitat as well. We go on to the next slide, and it should be fire, I believe. Prescribed fire. And so once we have cleared out the invasives, and once we have done timber stand improvement, if the site needed it, we can come through with prescribed fire. There's no real order that we do these three practices in. Okay, it's really like the term prescribed fire. All of these practices are prescribed. It comes down to a process that they call BMP, which is best management practice. So you kind of decide and choose when a site needs what on the current conditions. And so when it's ready for fire, part of the reason that we do fire is to kill the invasives as well. Once the chemical does help, fire also helps. So a lot of our native species actually co-evolved with fire. Our oak trees, if you think about an oak tree, very thick bark on it, which makes it actually quite fire resistant. Our native grasses are the same way. Our native warm season bunch grasses, they actually have really, really deep root systems. And so those root systems actually protect that plant. So when fire runs over it, and our invasive species did not co-evolve. They're not adapted to fire. And so it helps to knock those back. It helps to promote any of the native species that we're trying to promote. I don't have any pictures of any tools. You can kind of see in this picture, the worker on the bottom looks like he's got a backpack blower on. And so we just come through the woods, we blow a line down to the soil level, create that fire break, and then that's the whole thing, prescribed fire. So we're trying to control that. It's a very controlled fire. So speaking on that, I don't know what else, I guess it's a natural, fire is a very scary thing. It's the most fun thing we do. It's also the most dangerous thing we do. For years and years, fire was suppressed in a very, very, it was suppressed too much. I mean, if we think back, even to when I was a kid, Smokey the Bear was the thing, and everybody wanted to stop the fires. And now we have proof. If you think about the wildfires that are going on out west, one big thing that happened out there was those fuels compiled and they just, laid up on the forest floor. They created what we call slash. So that's another reason out there that they would do a prescribed fire. So that's a good thing to point out, just in terms of that fuel reduction. We go on to the next slide. And I've just got a couple more pictures of the fire. Yep. So the one on the left is a prairie that we did. And like I said, it's useful in both prairie and woodland sites. And you can just imagine if, some of these native plants that are kind of adapted to it and actually, benefit from it, how useful of a tool it can be. Because, if we've got a crew of 4 people that can go out and burn 100 acres, for that same crew to go out and spray over 100 acres would take days and days, where a fire we can run through in, just a matter of hours. And so that's the big 3, in this short time that we have. I feel like we could do a whole presentation and a long presentation on, what the strike team does and the practices that we utilize. But, that's a good introduction to it. So hopefully we'll be back to do more in the future. So I'll hand it off to Phil. You can talk a little bit about the restoration program that we both went through. So.
All right. So I'm Phil. I'm currently a student at Lewis and Clark Community College. I'm set to graduate from the Restoration Ecology program this May. I'm a former NGRREC summer intern, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then right now I'm currently the strike team junior habitat assistant. And basically tonight I'm just going to talk about kind of my experience with the program and the strike team and just kind of the avenues it's led me down. Next slide. So in the Restoration Ecology program, we kind of cover the basics of ecology and how ecosystems function, kind of how humans, wildlife, and vegetation all kind of come together and how they interact with each other. And since the program is restoration ecology, we put a big focus on actually restoring these systems. And so we kind of go over what kind of the theories and stuff on how to restore these sites. And we kind of make plans for these sites, kind of like we kind of decide when fire needs to be applied and stuff like that. So this program kind of gives us students kind of a good feel for what goes into just natural resource management. And so we also learn a lot of different field techniques, such as taking forest inventory. We look at, with forest inventory, we're looking at the species composition of woodlands, and so we're looking at what trees are present, as well as like what native plants are there and what invasive species are present. And then we also learn some more practical techniques, such as prescribed fire and kind of how to properly use chainsaws. And then one important aspect of the program that has been super beneficial is we learn kind of how to use ArcGIS software, which is if you're not familiar, it's a mapping software that we use it to kind of track where we've been doing management at, and like where certain studies are being conducted, and that program kind of helps us keep track of where this is all happening. Knowing how to use that program is very beneficial because it's rapidly becoming a very important asset to the natural resource management field. Next slide, please. So the head of our program, Scott Moss, he kind of takes pride on the fact that we cover a lot of certifications in the program. So these certifications, a lot of, I'd say most like conservation, land management jobs kind of require like these, like especially the wildland firefighting and the pesticide applicator license. So getting these certifications done while we're in school and kind of learning more about them is, I think, much more helpful than kind of doing them as they come while you're trying to apply for jobs. And as well as that, they kind of give us students a leg up when we go to apply for different jobs in this field. So I think that's a really, really good aspect of the program, and I'm glad it's been included in it. Next slide. And so now I'm just going to kind of talk about what it's like being a student in the program. So one of the big things that people might not think about is just the small class size. I think that's been very helpful for me. You get a lot more personal attention from advisors and professors, and it's just very very helpful to have that. Like some of my classes, I've had like the average for me in some of the program classes has been like 7 to 10 students, so it's pretty small, and you also kind of get to know each other a lot more. I think it's good for just kind of socializing, which is another kind of important aspect of this field. And so another good part about the program is the scheduling. It's very flexible. Kind of at the beginning of the program, you talk to Scott and you kind of tell him what your career aspirations are, like what kind of path you want to take, and he assigns you classes and stuff based on what you tell him, and it's usually pretty flexible. He definitely puts you kind of on the right path. Another really good part of this program is just the hands-on experience you get. In my first semester, I was forced to volunteer for a prescribed fire on the campus woods, and at first it was kind of overwhelming, but it was that experience was really cool and kind of got me more engaged in the program and kind of what we do. And I think that hands-on experience we get in our classes and kind of even just kind of on volunteer work days is really good for getting students engaged in this field of work. And then the program also requires an internship, which kind of takes place throughout a semester. This is good. I started off on the strike team through this internship, and I'm still on the strike team now, and it's been really beneficial. It's good for students to get that like field experience, kind of understand what it's like to work in this kind of career, and I definitely think it's good for them to kind of dip their toes in the water a little bit, and it'll make them more enthusiastic about the work. And then there's just another thing about the program is just a lot of opportunities to kind of engage more in the ecology field. There's a lot of like student work days, which if you're a student now listening, you should definitely go to those. It's a very good experience to have. Kind of gets you helps you understand what's going on out there with like invasive species and whatnot. Gives you a better understanding of that. And so I just think that the opportunities you get in this program are really good if you want to take this career path seriously. Next slide. So now I'm just going to talk a little bit about my time on the strike team. It's been kind of wild. As Cody mentioned before, there's kind of 3 main practices we use: prescribed fire, timber stand improvement, and then just invasive like removal through backpack spraying and just kind of killing off those species. By far the most fun aspect is the prescribed fire. It's been those days like you're always looking forward to burn days, and it's a lot, probably the most hardest work we do, but it's still like very rewarding. We always come home feeling pretty good about what we did that day. And if you look in the bottom right corner, you can see kind of a bunch of us standing around discussing a burn. That guy there in the red is Mark Phipps. He's the district biologist for this region. It's kind of cool getting to work with these professionals like that have been in the field for a long time and kind of learning from them. And I just think kind of the people we meet through the strike team are pretty good people to know if you're trying to pursue this career. And then in the bottom left corner, you can see me, Lindsay, who's a member of the strike team, and then there's Justin. That's us. We're at the Fish and Wildlife Conference, which I was able to go to. That was a pretty cool experience. I got to meet a lot of people from around, a lot of professionals from around the country, and kind of learn what goes into their job. And I got a lot of good advice from them. It was a pretty cool experience meeting all these conservation people in one building. And then in the top left corner, that's Cody there. I think this is one of the aspects of the strike team that's more important than like people think. It's just kind of, we're not always in the field. A lot of the times we're like doing maintenance on our equipment and just kind of making sure everything's ready for when we're in the field. And so we get a lot of, you learn a lot more from that than people might expect. In that picture, we're trying to put in a shelf for our trailer so we can hold more equipment. And I don't know, that was just it's good to acknowledge all that stuff that kind of goes into doing this work, all the little stuff like that. Like sharpening chainsaws is a big one. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about my NGRREC summer internship. And so for those of you that aren't familiar, it's basically an opportunity for undergrad students to gain some good research experience and kind of get an understanding of what like goes into doing research. And I know it can be kind of daunting for some students to when they hear about that, and this program is definitely good for kind of easing those worries. Next slide. So I did my internship project was looking at the effects of bush honeysuckle on Illinois avian species of greatest conservation need. And those are essentially bird species that are threatened or endangered. And so they're basically their populations are in decline. And so we're measuring the effect that bush honeysuckle has on those populations and kind of how disruptive honeysuckle can be to these species. Next slide. So this here is a graph showing the effects of bush honeysuckle on cumulative avian richness. And so cumulative avian richness just means the amount of bird species in an area, the different bird species in that area. So this graph is showing that there's a negative trend. So as there's more bush honeysuckle in a certain environment, it becomes the species there's fewer bird species, and so getting rid of this honeysuckle and managing it is something that should definitely be taking priority. Next slide. And so from this internship, I gained a lot, probably more than I could cover in just one slide. But so to start off, I kind of got a more in-depth look on just kind of how our local ecosystems work and how the invasive species play a role, and how kind of before this and before even the program, you know, plants and stuff are kind of always just the background. But now that I've learned a lot more, it's kind of, I guess you'd say, where like all of the action is happening. It's been a pretty cool kind of realizing that throughout this program and the internship. And then another aspect that was really good for me was learning how to properly enter and analyze data, which it's always been a struggle for me. Doing like math, it's always been kind of my weaker subject, and due to COVID, I wasn't actually able to do any field work, so I was just looking at previous data that was collected, and the whole summer I was kind of entering the data and then analyzing it, and then kind of piecing together what was actually happening out there, and kind of figuring all that out. It was a really cool experience that I wasn't expecting, really. I was kind of dreading doing that all summer, but it turned out to be pretty rewarding, and I was glad I got that opportunity. And the other thing is, I plan to like kind of go down this research route eventually in my career, and it was kind of good to have this kind of experience with that and understand what kind of goes into that and how all of that kind of fits together. So with that, I'll pass it over to Justin.
Thank you, Phil. So I'm just gonna have a few wrap up comments before we move to some questions. Our strike team, their main focus, of course, is, doing the habitat improvements, the restorations, especially in our confluence region of the state of Illinois. One really nice aspect about our strike team is it has been kind of a unifying way for us to engage with multiple partners in the region, as I mentioned earlier. A really nice benefit of our strike team too, of course, is, as Phil mentioned, his experiences with the strike team and how we've been able to engage with the restoration ecology program and provide student career development opportunities as well. So these are kind of some of the main, topics of our strike team, and I'm happy everyone was able to tune in this evening. And I want to thank everyone, Cody, Ross, Phil, for I kind of wrangled them into helping tonight, so I do appreciate their help. So thanks to them. So next slide, Jen, and we'll have some contact information for folks. My information is there if you have any questions. Ross's information is there. And then Scott Moss is the director of the Lewis and Clark Restoration Ecology Program. And there's, of course, his email is there, and links to our programs are right there. So with that, if there's any questions, we are available.
All right, so if you have any questions, feel free to type them out. Otherwise, if you would like to unmute yourself, you are more than welcome to verbally ask your questions as well, whatever your comfort level is. Currently, I don't think we have any questions, but if any come up, feel free to type them in. I do want to make everyone aware that it is 8:05, so feel free to exit the Zoom if you need to for time constraints or if you have other things going on. Just want to make you aware of the time. And then if we have any questions come up, all this will be on YouTube as well in a few days. Okay. Give it a few more seconds. No questions yet. Any final comments from anybody that presented tonight?
Just real quick, a couple other things we do that weren't really mentioned tonight. Through IRAP, we also do like prairie plantings and tree plantings as well. Just wanted to put that out there while I had everybody on.
Okay, well, with that, I hope everyone enjoyed this evening, and we look forward to seeing you again in March. We're going to actually cover some water topics in March to celebrate World Water Day. So we hope to see everybody there, and have a good evening. Stay warm. Enjoy the cold weather for one more day, and then it'll get warm again. All right, bye everyone.